G'day and welcome back. I'm Dean Sprague from Melbourne Chefs, and today we're talking to Sam May. Sam, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
I'm really good. Absolutely.
I'll just introduce myself first. I'm from Perth, so I'm a Balladong Noongar man on my mother's side, and also Gidja on my dad's side from the East Kimberley. I grew up in a small country town called Mora, 2 hours north of Perth. I was living in between Perth and there, in between my two parents. And I grew up, worked in Perth, worked on the wharfs, warehousing, that sort of thing. And I just the thing in WA that really struck me most is it's a state that's built around the mining industry. So I've worked on the wharfs, so right, cool. I couldn't work on the wharfs for any longer, so I did mining for a bit, drill and blast, and it just wasn't for me. I think the whole state is built around mining. 80% of the workload is mining. And I just couldn't, it sort of angered me in a way, the way that they were treating the land and the country. So I just didn't want to be a part of that. So I made a conscious decision of going, hey, I grew up in a rich sort of food upbringing just from my mother and father's side, Indigenous food, whatever, as well. I felt like when I eventually moved over here, I'm thinking like food would be the sort of future I want to head in. Because I didn't want to be around mining and I didn't want to be involved and I didn't want to feel like that was my only option in life. So I moved to Melbourne and did the National Indigenous Culinary Institute 3-week startup course at William Angliss. And I was lucky enough, I completed the course and lucky enough to be put into the European under Chef Ian Curley. The position opened up for me that they needed an apprentice at French Saloon. So I went to the French Saloon and did about a year of my first year apprenticeship within French Saloon and within French Saloon and Kirk's Wine Bar, working between the two joints, all owned by the same guy. So I was able to do that. In my second year, I wanted to challenge myself a bit more and eventually go and work in the European restaurant. I hadn't been cooking for that long either, so the first week, I just felt like a failure, and then I couldn't get anything right to save my life. But eventually, chip away, dig, and eventually I was able to hold my own. And I was lucky enough when I was a third year that a position opened up for me at the Appley Wine Bar under Chef Sam Kenway within the European group. So I thought, I want to relax a bit and enjoy cooking and bring that ethos of just knowing who you're cooking for and that sort of thing, romanticize it a little. So, and the Appley Wine Bar was an ideal situation for me because, you're constantly, it's like a little gated community where, it's regulars who go down and enjoy the food. So you tend to know who they are and what they like, and, it makes you feel good about cooking again. Yeah. After I did my apprenticeship, I wanted to, bring what I know Indigenous, like my Indigenous knowledge from Perth and all that, and I wanted to learn more about it. I had at the time, a really good idea what Indigenous ingredients there are out there, but I thought, I'm going to take it further. So I decided to go to Charcoal Lane because I believe at the time that it was a good position for me, and also working with young Indigenous trainees as well, doing front of house, back of house. It was a good thing that I can sort of, just not. I don't want to see myself as a mentor, chef, or anything like that, or a leader, but just be like a big brother to these trainees and that, and just give them that bit of a comfort thing, culturally appropriate comfort, where I know where they come from, they know where I come from, we know how to talk to each other. Charcoal Lane, I lasted about 9 months there because it slowly the degrading and the lowest expectation of young Indigenous people to be viewed. So like a young Indigenous trainee will come in and they just think the absolute lowest standard of that person. They don't expect them to do much. They don't expect them to sort of push themselves. And it didn't sit well with me, is that that's the impression that non-Indigenous people have when it comes to Indigenous people, is that we're the lowest of the low of expectation. So I decided to get out at Charcoal Lane and enjoy my Christmas. And it was actually the same Christmas that the bushfires happened. So I was able to get out of that and head back to the city. I decided to work at a cafe called Small Axe in Brunswick. I've been going there as a customer for like a year, and the owner knew I was a chef, so he sort of hit me up, and I think that's where I decided to jump out of chefing because I've rocked up at this cafe, and from a fine dining experience and an all-round experience, I'm like, okay, cool, eggs and toast, easy, can do that. But it was a far stretch. It was the workload where you have to prep and do service at the same time. I couldn't keep up with, and mentally, I've just got a young daughter who, I wanted to work days more so I can spend nights with my family. But by the time I get home, I've done 9-10 hours flat stick, no stop, and I just go home, and there wasn't anything to give her from me.
Yeah.
So in the end, I just felt like, it's not that important. What's important is the time that I have with my family. What's important is what they can get from me.
Yeah.
So I decided to. I've had my own ABN for a little while, doing small scale catering and demos for Melbourne Uni. So I've just spent this year just doing like demos for Melbourne Uni, ACU. I've done a few for Hub Space and William Angus for NAIDOC Week. So that was pretty busy. Also, Foodie Trails. I've just given them a few recipes and done an interview, sort of a video, given it to them. They're doing a native flavors box, which is really cool. It's going to get sent around the country. And I think that's what, a part of the Indigenous food now that's happening. It's just rocketed into pop. Who's profiting from these Indigenous ingredients? It's not Indigenous people, because we only get 5% of the profit margin for anything Indigenous. So I think even the suppliers for these native ingredients, they're not Indigenous. It's the smaller scale groups that are
exactly, and there needs to be that community aspect so that
that's it.
Everyone's involved. There's a vested interest. There's definitely that sustainability principle. We need to keep this going because it's employment, it's jobs, it's being able to take our culture out to the world as well. And
definitely, I've done a bit of research and I've only found there's two. They make it look like it's run by Indigenous people, but in fact it's not. They got the logos, they got the designs of people and all that, but essentially it's not the case. I think there's only two native suppliers that I know of who are Indigenous run and organised, and that's Something Wild, which is based in Adelaide, and I think Daniel Motlop, the next footballer for Port Adelaide, is the owner of that. And also Indigrow, which is based out in La Perouse, Botany Bay, South Sydney, which is really cool because I was born in La Perouse, which is really nice. So I think they're the only two. There's definitely more out there, but it'll be more of a partnership agreement, that sort of thing. And I think the most important thing I want to do with like what I'm about in my ADN is, I'm more of a culinary consultant where I can do demos and I can educate non-Indigenous people about what Indigenous stuff is out there and how to use them in your ingredients and stuff like that. I think my cooking style, it's more it's not fine dining anymore. I wouldn't even call it that. I think I want to highlight the native ingredients, and I want to do I don't want to have Imi stroganoff because the Imi is native, but stroganoff isn't.
Yeah.
So I want to I'm getting involved with an ICI where towards Christmas time we might be doing a cut Mary of a whole pig and just cooking it in the earth, and doing native herbs and spices and fry backing that and then sending them out to people as a package sort of thing. It's going to be really cool. I think that style of cooking, the traditional methods and that, I think I want to bring into modern Australia and show, hey, we're not just about a medium rare kangaroo and a bit of mashed potato with wattle seed in it. This is how we cook. This is how we survive. Yeah. So I think bringing that Indigenous aspect and bringing it, not being told what's Indigenous, but showing people what's Indigenous. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, we're only in the mainstream sort of culinary world, we're only just getting used to the access. I mean, it's probably the last 10, 20 years, but just getting used to the access to these ingredients. So it's like, oh, what do they work with? What's the flavor profile? And of course, using that as a springboard to be creative and all that kind of stuff. I guess like what I'd like to come back to, Sam, is your early career. I mean, a career as a chef it's a difficult career, juggling family, juggling the long hours, the toll on your body, the toll on your mental health. What advice would you have for other young chefs that are coming into the industry, and specifically Indigenous chefs coming into the industry?
I think the most important thing is straight after a shift, just go straight home. You don't need to go to the pub.
Guilty. Guilty of doing just that too.
I mean, the stresses that I had when I was at the European as a second year, you know, and the amount of failures that I had, you know, I actually found comfort in having a beer after work. And then the issue came that I was enjoying those beers way too much, and then, you know, I'm trying to work drunk. And okay, when you're young and you got all that energy, you don't have a kid at home. Okay, you can do it and go for it. But I think in terms of my career and my, you know, if I didn't go to the pubs as much, you know, I kind of think, where would I have been? You know, it's that little thing. I mean, and the hardest thing is to not want to quit. It's so easy to quit. And I think my first year, second year, you know, I think at least at one point every week, I just wanted to quit because it just wasn't worth copying the, you know, the passive aggressiveness of other people. Is it worth the anxiety and stuff like that? But, you know, out of it, there are positives. The harder you work, you know, it's going to be endless. I've became like a Victorian TAFE ambassador. You know, my mug was on a tram going through the city and everything. You know, would I have thought that going into my chefing career? No. I mean, young chefs, they have this urge to want to design a menu item that's going to change the world. Is it going to happen? Probably not. But I'd rather have a young chef with that willpower to work with me rather than someone who's just there to make money and piss off. Because, you know, it's that urge, that inner fire. Yeah, it's that inner urge and that inner fire is what separates chefs from, like, you know, cooks. It's very hard to explain. And I mean, you know, did I enjoy cooking? I'd say 50-50, a healthy 50-50. There's moments where it's just absolutely rewarding, and there's moments where you just feel like the lowest of lows, and you just
tearing your
I think
hair
the calling
out.
card for me to quit was I think the calling card for me to quit was twice in a week. I was around about midnight, about 2-3 o'clock. I'd woken up from an anxiety attack and I felt like I was going to die, and I actually felt like, you know, that I wouldn't be bad with that because I just didn't want to feel like that. And it was so hard, you know, being a customer of this cafe that I worked at, being friends with the owner that I worked at, and having to say to him, look, bro, I'm sorry, I'm letting you down. You know, I remember I was in tears talking to him, and he's trying to, you know, I believe in you. It's like, look, I can't. And I think I'm glad that I got that support from him to transition out, and I got that talk from him to say, hey, it's okay. Because I don't know what I would have done that week if I hadn't have been told, hey, it's okay, it's life.
And exactly, and having that courage to speak up as well, instead of just continuing to suffer and suffer yourself.
I think the main thing chefing has taught me is never run away from the issues, because you can't run away. You know, when you're in the kitchen, you know, you got something going on, and you're there, you're stuck there. You cannot run away. The only way to get somewhere is to move forward. So I think a lot of that anxiety that I've had, you know, the best thing forward is to just keep moving forward and keep going on with it. And, you know, I think the highlight of my cooking career was, you know, doing a cooking demo for Melbourne Uni for the first time, and that's where I eventually met my partner, and, you know, we have a baby. So, you know,
fantastic.
Cooking's got me.
Well, you know what? What you're doing with your demos and talking, your narrative, the stories behind the food that you're doing is more important than you being in front of a stove. I mean, even going back to your early reference where that fire in your belly came from the distaste of being involved in the mining industry, and knowing what you're doing to this land, it does have an effect upon people. You know, us here in the suburbs think, hey, they're damaging our planet there, without getting into that. That spurred you to say, hey, I need to do something different here. Got into cooking. You've had some really great opportunities there. You've been exposed to some brilliant ingredients. You're questioning what is next. What else can I do with this to raise the narrative, to raise awareness, to support those Indigenous businesses who are doing the right thing in a sustainable sense.
Yeah,
it's an incredible future in front of you, and where you found yourself now grounded with what's important: my health, my well-being, my family, my community.
I remember when I first stopped chefing, the physical toll it had on my body. Like I'll go back to when I was in third year. I tried to get back into footy. I got back in the footy and I played for Club West Brunswick, and I was in my first game for the club. First game I played in a couple of years. I've actually quit smoking. So I was 5 days without any cigarettes, and I was on the down here and I was flying high, and I was like, life's great. And then like come the second quarter in, I got knocked in the head and I ended up cracking 3 vertebrae in my neck. So I went, and I'm quite lucky, you know, I've made a full recovery and everything like that. Yeah. But I think the pressures of last thing my head chef needed, Sam Kenway, was a message Saturday that morning.
Never on a Saturday. Never on a Saturday. Your arms can be falling off. You've got to be there. You've got to be there.
Exactly, and I couldn't. I'm you know, laying in a hospital bed. I'm not allowed to move. You know, so I think, you know, there's the joke when I was in trade school. You know, you could die and your head chef will call you up on a Ouija board asking if you're going to come in.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I went straight back into work after 3 months of just rest and let it heal, and I went straight back into work, and my body just wasn't the same. And eventually, by the time I finished, my lower hips, I went to a physio, and they said, my lower hips and my lower back are just wrecked from the constant, you know, high intensity movement. Sometimes you don't have the time to squat and do the fundamentals of looking after your body. You just got to get in there and get that AL. You got to just get it done. You think very little of what toll it has on your body. Like, I'm 29 and I feel like I was nearly broken.
Well, I'm only 23, mate. So, you know.
There you go. And it does have a physical toll. And one thing I will say to young chefs is just bend your knees. Bend your knees. Yeah. Don't bend down. Bend your knees. Look after your back. You only have one. There's only so many uses your back can do for you. Without it, you're bugging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess anyone that's considering a career in professional cookery, and again, I mean, what you'll be doing over the next couple of years is, you mentioned you don't want to be considered a role model or a mentor, but you are. It's being that big brother to support others. It's saying, hey, I've got you. Yeah. I know it's going to be tough, but I'm here behind you, beside you, all the way. So, you know,
I definitely wouldn't be able to make it through my first and second year as an apprentice if I didn't have, like, you know, your Todd Moses characters looking after you and always having your best interests. Or, you know, my mate Colin Barkley, he was at the European at the time. He was able to, you know, take me under his wing and, you know, really look after me and give me that big brother sort of feel. And you need that. Any apprentices needs that person to look after them. It's a very lonely world out there, isn't it?
That's right. And I mean, the industry does have a way of really affecting people, whether it's the physical or it's the mental health or whatever.
It's also the I don't know, I get a little bit of trauma. I call it the voices in my head. I'm cooking at home and I just feel it like I'm in service and I have someone on, and it's something that changes. Sticks with me too.
Absolutely.
Changes.
No, never changes. I suppose, you know, where we can go, I mean, a lot of long-time chefs become, I'm going to go with that romantic view, that become a lot more philosophical, specifically about food, but in life in general. So those voices are what we need to listen to. It's you know, that instinct, that passion, that drive that we have. But
Yeah.
I would also like to think that you've got a much older, deeper voice behind that as well, Sam.
Yeah, definitely. There's always there's layers to it. So you know, I'll have the the rushing voice, but then I'll also have the voice behind saying, just chill, it's fine. You can only do so much at one time, you know. And I think
Absolutely.
it's so hard as chefs, you know. You try to do everything you can within the first hour of walking in. I learned to really slow down when it came to service and prep, just so you can think about what you're doing, not rushing around trying to do everything at once, but just do a couple things, 3 or 4 things, and if you can do them all at the same time, good on you. But don't try and do 6 things.
No, exactly right. And the thing is, you're never going to have enough time. You're never going to have enough prep, and it's being conscious of yourself in that moment. I mean, the kitchen environment's going to get our adrenaline pumping anyway. I can feel it now just talking about it.
Yeah, like it used to be like 11 o'clock. I'd be all jittery and like I'm not even at work, but it's just there. It's just that constant pressure, constant you know, need of improvement and that. But that's what drives people, you know.
Yes.
People love that. I mean, you know, a first year apprentice, you know, you got a 50-50 chance of just dropping out.
Yeah.
You know, my first year group, I remember Bart at William Angler said, 50% of you won't be here. And we're sort of like, whatever, mate.
Yeah,
come second year, only 50%.
Well, it won't be me. It won't be me.
Yeah, exactly. But you just never know. Like, it just, things come up. You know, I've got a mate who just did his chefing apprenticeship, and now he's not even chefing; he's doing something else. So,
well, you know what? Like, it is the case, and you know, the talk around Alzheimer's is basically, you know, you really haven't proved yourself until you're 10 years into it, and it's a European thing as well, where, you know, a chef is generally in their 60s, and it's crazy. I mean, Australia has such a young hospitality industry. We should be doing more to support more people coming in the industry. I mean, there's stacks of employment out there. There's plenty of opportunity for a career that can take you around the globe. There's also ways of, you know, being family friendly as well as having a career.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is my daughter and my partner, and I think the most important thing to them is me as a person and what I can do physically and mentally for them.
Yes.
It wasn't worth it just you know, chasing that goal, you know, improving on dish after dish after dish, and spending, you know, 70, 80 hours a week at some place, and you know, the money's good, but the money's not that great either.
No.
So what have you got to show for them?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah. No, that's.
I mean, but if I was really chasing money, I'd probably be like chefing on the mines or in the oil rigs or something like that, you know. But then that time that I spend with my family, I'm not going to get back.
Doesn't work out. Yeah, exactly right.
No.
I mean, finding that balance is important. But it sounds like you're definitely onto it. Your well-being of your family is all that matters, and the general population have found that out over this last couple of months.
Definitely, I will say that, like, a lot of restaurants and pubs and cafes had to shut because of COVID, and it's bad. But, you know, I think of those head chefs that I know who have kids and they work 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and they've probably done it for like 10 years. You know, to have this amount of time with your family, it's been, you know, I can't speak for other people, and I don't want to, but you know, that's the positive you can take out of that. I mean, I've had you know, COVID hit Melbourne pretty bad, and I've had like employment opportunity that I got, and COVID happened, and that just I don't know if it's still happening. You just don't know, and it's that uncertainty. So that's why I'd really jumped in hard with the you know, my cooking, just the culinary consultancy business, just doing demos, you know, interviews, anything. What I do basically is, you know, teach people about Indigenous ingredients and their uses, and also teach them about Indigenous people, how I grew up, what I've got taught, what traditional knowledges I have, especially around the Perth region. But, you know, one thing I fascinated in when I came to Melbourne is there is such rich history of Indigenous culture here in Melbourne, but the impacts of colonisation really hit Melbourne hard. I'll go to like Healesville. There was a Aboriginal settlement, and they used to do farming and stuff like that. It was really great, but then a non-Indigenous manager rocked up, got a bit jealous, and lowered the rations on the people, and then they slowly starved out. Disease happened, so a whole generation of people in Melbourne, just 2-3 generations. Also, you got to factor in stolen generation as well. People, who found out that their grandmother was like Indigenous and was taken to a mission and had the Indigenous aspect of her life taught out of her, bred out of her, beaten out of her. The horrors of stolen generation. I only know what I know from back home with my grandfather, grandmother, everything like that, uncles, aunties, and everything like that. And you come over here to Melbourne, and the same things happen, but for a longer time. Yeah. So you can see now with the impacts of Indigenous people here in Melbourne. There's a lot of people who are finding out that they have Indigenous heritage only like in the last few years of their grandmother, great grandmother's side, and they're finding out now. And that's that's the effects of stolen generation. That's the effects of colonisation on our people.
Well, I've got
I think
two friends myself who recently found out about their Indigenous heritage, and things kind of clicked into place for them. It gave them an understanding of who they were, but also left a lot of questions. Left a lot of questions as well.
That's it, and I think it leaves a lot more questions unanswered than there is going to be unanswered. And I think it's a really sad moment in Australian history. And I think it still happens now with Aboriginal kids being put into foster care and stuff like that. It happened in Perth recently where a mother just went out for shopping and she left her baby with her brother, and her brother was just making a phone call. The neighbours overheard the baby crying. They called the police, and the police immediately went there and took that baby into state care without even talking to the mother, talking to the brother, stuff like that. And that happened this year. So all the mother was doing was literally just going out and buying groceries, doing the right thing.
It is appalling. I mean, not only colonised history, but what we're still doing now. I mean, if anything from 2020, with the highly visual images that we got from the US and its effect upon the global awareness of Black Lives Matter. Here we are. We're still basically poking around like we're the colonisers.
I think the Black Lives Matters, movement, it sticks with me. Like I talk to a lot of people who, they're very naive as to what happens to Aboriginal people in custody. I'll tell you right now, I know more people who have died from deaths in custody than COVID. Yet COVID has a global impact. My grandfather, my mother's father, was taken to Perth lockup and belted to death in the 70s. So, black deaths in custody is something that affects me on a lot more personal note than COVID. I'll tell you that now.
Absolutely. Well, I guess
it's not even
No, I was just going to say, like, no, you go right ahead, Sam. I'd really like you to finish that. I was just going to say, hey, just to sort of lighten it a little bit and bring it back, but please finish what you were about to say there.
I got my eldest nephew. He's a police cadet in Perth, and I don't want to banter about him. I actually don't talk to him about him much about his career. Only that it's work and stuff. But I just want him to feel that he should just go into work and do his job. I don't want him to feel like he's the person to change stuff for Indigenous people and police. Nobody should feel that pressure. Nobody should need to feel that. But that's my only hope for my nephew as a police cadet, is to not feel like that you are the person to do change for your people
you're
or
a
anything
police
like
officer.
that. Just go to your job and just do your job.
And things just be normal. You know, you wouldn't point at someone from another country and say, hey, we've got that country as a police officer. You wouldn't. You'd say, here's a police officer, or here's an accountant, or here's a chef. You know, just normal conversation. We're all human. You know, we've all got brothers, sisters, and kids, and all, you know, we share that same journey. And
I think in terms of like the rate.
I do want to jump in, Sam. No, I was just going to say, my screen has actually frozen up. It's been frozen for about 10, 15 minutes or so. I'm not aware of what the time is, so I was going to go for about 30 minutes or so.
You're right.
I think we must be sort of round about there. But what I might do is it just kind of close it off. Now, don't disappear, don't jump off the call, but I'll just sort of close it off. I'll thank you for your time. But mate, what you've done is you've got this voice here. It's a matter of getting it out there. You know, where I could see you making a stand is just doing your thing, making it work for you. If it's food, it's food, and whether it's doing demos or just consulting to people, I mean, me personally, I'd love to get hold of some specific native ingredients and you could take it to a US audience, particularly some of those sweeter type things, you know. So
there's more sweeter native ingredients than there are savoury. Like, you know, you got your strawberry gum. You know, you'll throw wattle seed in there. Even bush tomatoes have a sweet note to them.
Beautiful,
very similar to dark chocolate.
Yes.
Yeah, very similar to dark chocolate. That's what bush tomatoes taste like, and you wouldn't even think that from a tomato to begin with. I think the most important Indigenous ingredient I want to talk about, especially in Victoria, is warrigal greens. You know, or New Zealand spinach they call it. But warrigal greens, you know, grown locally here around Victoria, yet you can't find a bugger. Even if you go to Ceres or Bunnings or whatever, you can't actually buy a plant. You know, it's got to grow on the coast and all that. Even just propagating it is a challenge. You know, you can't grow it from a seed. You actually have to like snap a bit off and propagate it in a glass of water. But you know, it's such a rich ingredient. You know, that ingredient can replace spinach. That ingredient can replace lettuce, cos, whatever. And the same stuff for saltbush. You know, I did a cooking demo using saltbush and warrigal greens as my you know, sort of green salad element to my protein and my sauce. You know, these things can replace. I mean, saltbush is doing so much in terms of you know, cleaning up the land. You know, due to farming, so much land clearing, the trees that filter the water systems are now salt lakes. But people are planting saltbush in there to, you know, take out those salty nutrients and stuff and refresh that water. Finger limes grow out there, succulents like calcula, all that sort of stuff. I mean, revegetating these salt lakes and letting them once again become fresh will just really benefit the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what we're finding out, like an author, Bruce Pascoe, for example, with Dark Emu, is that there are historical records of this abundant food system that existed well before anyone arrived from outside to say, hey, this is ours. And I think it's a combination of being respectful to its heritage, but using our knowledge, our scientific knowledge and understanding of the ecology and conservation to be able to, how can we grow this so that it's economically viable, but it's also, you know, we're not taking anything away from the land itself. We're being respectful. We're working with them. Now, they're just recently in the Guardian, there was a native millet, which is ground into a type of flour, which is you know, it's gluten-free, it's high in proteins, it's high in antioxidants. That sort of thing is worth exploring more, and it's here. It's just being able to see those ingredients that surround us. So as far as I can see,
Exactly.
Sam, you're
I mean,
part of that voice of raising that awareness of what's out there, and
yeah.
let's look at it again.
And don't get me wrong, I'm totally not against farming, because, you know, I grew up in a wheat belt town, and my dad grew up in a wheat belt town. My dad worked on farms since he was like 13. You know, I remember my dad would do uni blocks at Curtin Uni, so he'd leave me with his best mate, who's a farmer who he grew up with, and I'd go stay with them and go learn stuff on the farm, and that wheat and sheep, you know, that sort of thing. And I get it. And this guy, he taught me, Never What is his name? He's like my dad's best mate. The locals in the town actually call him the reverse of Michael Jackson. He was a white fellow who went black. He showed me a lot of the, you know, the Aboriginal grinding stones to make flour. We'd walk along on his farm and we'd find like shavings of granite on a pathway on a song line, and that's where the old people used to walk along and make spears, you know.
Yeah.
He taught me how to track. He taught me how to kill, you know, skin animals, tan animals, that sort of thing. You know, I've learned that, you know, farming's not bad, but it's just we're doing something and modifying something never meant for the country. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think, it'll be interesting what happens with these the farming when it, you know, I think eventually everything's going to transition into native ingredients, you know, even due to, like, you know, kangaroo with carbon emissions that it takes to, you know, raise cattle and that.
Yeah.
When it comes to carbon emissions from kangaroo and game, they ain't any.
Yeah.
So, you know, kangaroos
and they're
a huge
bountiful
market in Australia in terms of. Yeah, there's more kangaroos than people, and nobody believes you. But, you know, you go and cross the Nullarbor, and you'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you know, with respect to, you know, the settlers who bought all these things with them, what a shame that there wasn't that knowledge beforehand that they didn't actually need to do that, and that there was plenty here to begin with, and that being respectful to
Exactly.
and not trying to take over a people in the worst possible sense. There is enough here for all. I think, you know, again, going back to mining, it's a way of totally disrespecting the land and the country. But we can pay. There's plentiful mineral down there. Let's just dig it all up, and we've got it now.
Exactly. I was working on a mine, and at the bottom of the pits, they were finding water, but they were saying it was like 8% saltier than the ocean, and they just couldn't fathom the fact that the water was salty. But if you look at the soil that they were digging up from these massive like hills just to get the iron ore, just, you know, they were digging up deposits like limestone and stuff like that would filter that water and bring it out to fresh. You know, you're in the middle of where I was working at the time was above, like just north of Southern Cross, Cooling Nobbing, I think. Yeah. And, you know, right in the middle of nowhere, but you have a bountiful bushland that stretches from Esperance all the way up into, you know, near Darwin and Alice Springs. How's that bushland getting its nutrients? And it's from the water that's sitting at the bottom of a mining pit that's 8% saltier than the ocean. Yeah. It's really me as an Aboriginal person, I'm just going, how do you explain it to someone with a degree? You feel like you don't have a voice, and it's really sad. And I think, and the saddest thing is when the mining companies like Rio Tinto, they blow up an Indigenous cave with artifacts and that, knowing that this is there, and yet they have the nerve to want to sponsor Aboriginal people in sporting colleges, stuff like that. But I think the best thing was the Indigenous people in Perth they've decided not to do anything with Rio Tinto in regards to sponsorship and stuff like that, and that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can give it.
And you know, like there was such an outpouring of disbelief about that particular action, and yet who's been held accountable for it?
Nobody gets held accountable. Even with you know, taking traditional lands, you know, the traditional owners, when they get paid out, they don't get a lump sum figure just thrown at them. They have to first come up with ways of which they were going to spend that money,
Yeah.
bring it to the mining companies and say, this is how we're going to use the money. And then the mining company actually actions that agreement. Most of the times they're going to buy a car. Most of the times they're going to get vehicles and stuff. A lot of the time they'll want to try and build art galleries and make it a sustainable thing for their communities and stuff like that. But, you know,
the reality,
whether it happens or not, I can't speak.
No, that's right.
But the reality is, mining is going to be the end of this country, I think, globally, because, you know, the resources are going to run out.
Yeah,
they're going to run out. And what's going to be left is
a barren land with no knowledge of how to bring it forward and restore it or work with it. No, absolutely, totally good. I mean, the future is what we make it, and enough people aware and taking action towards more sustainable goals is definitely where we need to be with respect to Indigenous cultures and people, ingredients again, but it's taking the learnings of the past and the mistakes of the past and just saying, we've got to move. Sam, I want to thank you so much for we've barely begun to scratch the surface. This is definitely a discussion that needs further in-depth discussion, talks, awareness. I want to thank you so much for your time, Sam, and I think even talking to you, my awareness has already grown, and the outrage as well, Sam, of what we are doing to this country, and the complacency behind that. And there are so many issues to begin to address. We've barely begun that process.
Yeah.
Well, on a light note, Sam, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about not only Indigenous foods, but culture and bigger picture issues for Australia. Thank you.